God, that really brings back memories. Wow, you've done your research because I had forgotten about those prizes. I remember them now. Yeah, I was writing on the Seneca, I think. Well, the student body was quite, although it is quite large, it was very and it is quite amazing to see that, to look back and think about what you were like when you were 11, which for me would be insufferable. Oh my God, this is what he wrote. I think the more interesting thing that classics can bring to you is sort of seeing how the stories and the text influence later things, and how it has this kind of incredible drama to it. So yeah, you can frame your world in that way, but it can be exploited. The lack of authority in the UN, its inability. It seems really strange now, having gone through so many books and so many authors in Latin, but the first time I was confronted with a bit of Julius Caesar, I thought to myself, oh my God, this is what he wrote. It absolutely bowled me over. Power is offered in this country, has attracted, and you can see it in the government. You only have to mention people like Boris Johnson to see how a desire for power and hunger for power corrupts, because he's been classically educated, like me. Other people who do wrong will get what they deserve.
Boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to my podcast, Coffee's on Me, David Quan, where I strive to give guests legacy-worthy interviews that listeners can enjoy while cooking, commuting, relaxing, or walking their pets. This is another episode recorded in London this summer, and my guests and I are enjoying a flat white together, which is wonderful here. The smell isn't the best, but not the coffee, but the
flat white smells fine.
I feel very blessed that we're now approaching the next milestone of 100,000 podcast downloads. Please know that I don't take any of your time, feedback and support for granted, because when I started this Passion Project podcast at a low point of my time in Cambridge, I was genuinely motivated by 3 founding ideals. Number 1, purpose of giving. Number 2, learning from others. And number 3, sharing of stories. These 3 aspirations still make up the content description for every single episode. Indeed, the opportunities to strive to give my courageous and insightful guests legacy-worthy interviews over coffee, tea, bubble tea, water, juice, or whatever it is, despite my many inadequacies, have been a tremendous privilege that imbues me with gratitude. I know that I will listen back and look back to laugh at how naive I am. But if you have been enjoying the discussions on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts, thank you, and please do consider leaving a review and nominating a guest by contacting me via my Linktree, David Quan. Seeing this podcast on people's Spotify Wraps or receiving positive messages about the guests give me tremendous fulfillment. I cannot thank my wonderful guests enough for their courage and insights, and I genuinely maintain the deep conviction that this passion project, if wholly true to those founding motivations about giving, learning, and sharing, is a worthwhile pursuit. So now on to my incredibly hardworking and talented guest from very, very far away by Cambridge standards. Andrew McLeod is a classicist at Girton College, University of Cambridge. He was born in London, grew up in Derbyshire, and attended Christ Hospital School in Sussex. At Cambridge, he is a dedicated college rower, though by his own admission, hardly the most proficient. He has rowed 4 bumps campaigns, winning Blaze in 2022, and just got back from rowing the qualifier race at Henley. He's also involved in organising high school level debating conferences for CUUNA, which is the Cambridge University United Nations Association, and is a lively member of CULC, Cambridge University Labour Club, often participating in their meetings. Outside of his degree and the pub, Andrew enjoys the soul-preserving hobby of model making, sci-fi and western films, as well as supporting Derby County Football Club, which he insists is quote-unquote the best team in history.
Quite right.
Andrew, welcome to my podcast, Coffee's on Me, David Quan.
Thank you for having me, David.
Andrew, you've accomplished a lot, especially academically and extracurricular-wise. I was wondering, what would... if I asked Simon Reed, the headmaster at Christ Hospital, how would he describe you?
Oh my goodness. I think Simon Reed would just say something very magnanimous like, "Oh, Andrew's done very well." God, that really brings back memories. Isn't there? I last saw him October or November, I think, at a sort of alumni dinner. Mm. He's pleased to see me, and it's nice to see him again.
So when you won the St. John's College Classics and Ancient History competition, he was quoted in the media saying, "Brilliant news and very impressive." What kind of culture did your school have in terms of intellectual pursuits? Because I've seen a number of prizes that you've won and the competitions that you've entered.
Wow, you've done your research because I had forgotten about those prizes. I remember them now. Yeah, I was writing on the Seneca, I think. Yeah, no, it was the school had it was very academically focused, and very invested in getting the best out of every pupil and unlocking potential. But I think, especially with it being a boarding school, the purpose was a lot more kind of holistic, and to provide an education not only academically but also kind of a physical education, and most importantly, I'd say like a social education, because it's a charitable institution. The majority bursary scheme. The intention behind the school is not only to provide a standard higher education, but also to give opportunities to people who might not necessarily have them. So it's a sort of social consciousness that I think comes to the school as well as the academic pursuits.
They should hire you back as a missions officer after this. Your school seemed really interesting. There are a number of traditions from my research, and one of them is marching to lunch with the band every day except Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday, weather permitting. What does that even mean?
So I did that. I played in the band from my third year onwards, and basically what happens is you have your lessons in the morning, and then all the pupils kind of muster on either side of this quadrangle. The band comes in at the top of the quadrangle, we play, students march in and go have their lunch, then we march back, and then much later go and have our lunch.
It
was just it has a lot of weird things that now seem strange looking back on it, but at the time it's kind of how normal it all seems.
And speaking of weird and strange things, there are like nicknames of school, like Housey and the long coat apparently called Housey coats.
Mm-hmm.
What other kind of, I guess, acronyms or perhaps codes? Cambridge has a number of them that your school had.
Mm.
And what did it mean, going into a boarding school and learning almost like a new set of lexicon, right?
Yeah.
Like cultural capital in a sense.
Oh God, the language. The language, I think, by the time I joined, there wasn't as much of it in use, apart from the Housey, which is still very much the same thing. But it's more like, it was more in terms of the kind of the customs of everything, and kind of going into an environment where everything is just completely out of the ordinary. But then as soon as you're immersed in it, and it's everywhere around you all the time, it becomes completely part of the course. So, getting up every morning, putting on yellow socks and a sort of Tudor greatcoat just kind of makes sense to you, which is bizarre to think back on, but at the time, perfectly normal.
And in terms of the mission there, did you start as an 11-year-old at the start?
Yeah. I went in 2014, and I was 11, and it was quite hard being away from home for a little while to begin with, but actually, as you make friends and as you get more used to it, it becomes a lot more natural. And actually, it was really good. The self-reliance, even though it was a school, learning to be able to live more independently, especially in the later years, was obviously really good practice for university and made a transition quite natural.
Why did you want to leave home?
Well, I mean, at the time it was presented by my parents as a choice, and it seemed a more interesting option. I remember going there I've been for an open day to the secondary schools in Derbyshire, and they were very good. And actually, there's someone at my college who went to the high school I was going to go to in Derbyshire. But I went for an open day at Christ Hospital, and
stunning grounds and
it really sold you on just the appearance alone. So yeah, from there I was kind of I was dead set, and I would do it all again.
And what was the admission process like?
There was like a residential thing where you'd go for like a weekend and you'd sit like an English exam and a maths exam, and you live in like one of the dormitory buildings for a day. I think that's that, and then they write back to you, and then you turn up the next October.
So I guess I'm just trying to understand a bit more about how you came to be and how you kind of developed the interests that you had, and I found in 2016, so I guess you would be around 13. You entered the Tony Ray Jones photography competition and one of the juniors who was awarded. Walk me through like the underlying kind of thinking process behind how you allocated your time in school and how you developed your hobbies, because you were entering these philosophy competitions, photography, lots of, I guess, the theme and the thread underlying it is arts and creativity, right?
Yeah, so obviously like your life is quite regimented at a school. You've got a timetable for every point of your day. But I think it was just a process of, because there were a lot of these competitions on offer internally and externally, and especially with the academic ones, that was when I was starting to think about, well, with the help of my parents, think about Cambridge and think about admissions. And by then, with the philosophy and the classics, I had an idea of what subject interested me the most. And then photography, I mean, that was a creative pursuit that I enjoyed and I still do enjoy. Not to a very high standard, but it's more, it's whatever makes you happy, isn't it?
What was your friendship group like? Did you hang out with the same group of people, or are you quite open to just hang out with different groups?
Well, the student body was quite, although it was quite large, it was very insular. So over the course of 7 years, living with the same people, you got to know them very well. So the guys who I lived with in my boarding house, there's a group of about 7 of us, and they're still friends with them to this day. I don't see them as much as I should. I was going to while I was in London, but sadly my friend couldn't make it. But and even in the student body as a whole, you get really close, especially by the very end after 7 years, to the point that you know almost everyone in your year so well, and you get on with them so well.
Do you feel like in that kind of what you said about large but insular, when you're living together, but obviously as kids at that age you're still developing and growing, is there at all a problem of your identity from other people's perceptions already set? Perhaps a mistake that you make, or perhaps a particular strength that you show, and is it hard to then keep developing and changing when you feel like other people already know you, if that makes sense? Yeah,
I mean, I think it's because everyone is still developing at that point. You're still able to see how you and other people around you have developed as people. And it is quite amazing to see that, to look back and think about what you were like when you were 11, which for me would be insufferable. and then by the time I was leaving at 18 and seeing myself and my friends generally more mature and more or less adults.
Were you quite popular?
I don't know to be honest. It was a fairly even playing field. I think for my first 3 years I was basically unknown, and as far as anyone can be. And then by the end, you identify a broad group of people you can hang out with, and by the end, you were basically.
How did your teachers describe you? I guess studious, creative, hardworking, ambitious.
Wow. I think of my housemaster, Mr. Jones, would describe me in my early years as loud, probably.
Loud?
Maybe.
Like in class, you would be quite vocal.
In class, I would be loud. No, but I think, maybe that seasoned into a more mature, lively. But I'm very fond of a lot of my teachers there, especially my Latin teachers, and I've just been in touch with them to tell them about how things were going at Cambridge. And it was great to hear from them again. Mr. Hatton and Miss Patel, Dr. Thompson, very iconic figures in my life though. And I think responsible for a lot of my interests and keeping my interest in the classics going. But that's the thing about it, we all have.
You never forget them.
Exactly, we all have those teachers who.
What made them so good? What makes great teachers in your opinion, in your experience?
They were just so incredibly passionate about the subject, incredibly informed on it, and the ability to not only know a lot about the subject and be able to teach it, but to teach it in a way that makes people so invested in it that they would go to Cambridge and study it. I think that is the mark of a great teacher.
And I guess with classics, it's requires a lot of passion, as you said, but also with passion comes self-investment, where I guess lessons would finish, and in your free time, I'm assuming that you're probably reading more, either books, poetry, art, film.
Yeah.
Was it like a conscious decision for you at the time that, hey, I'm interested in this and I need to go do more homework myself?
Well, I think one of the first reason I was attracted to Latin, because it was started with Latin, is that the school offered it from year 7. So that was something which attracted me straight away as something kind of unique that I wouldn't see otherwise.
So some kids won't be able, like you can choose whether to take it or not.
So you start by basically doing like all the subjects, like you do your maths and your English, and then you do your Latin, history, geography, etc., all the science and so on, for your first few years until you choose your GCSE options. So Latin was one of those ones offered to start, you had to do to start with. And yeah, it really interested me straight away. It's just something, and I remember, it seems really strange now, having gone through so many books and so many authors in Latin, but the first time I was confronted with a bit of Julius Caesar, I thought to myself, oh my God, this is what he wrote. It absolutely bowled me over, which is quite, it's something you become quite blasé about quite quickly. But yeah, no, and that's another place where my teachers were so good. They were able to, I mean, being only a kid, I was not immediately gripped with a desire to read more and take a great academic interest, but they were able to provide me with things that I was interested in, even at the stage that I was. And actually, one of the books that one of the teachers, Dr. Thompson, recommended to me is now what I'm writing my thesis on in my third year. So you could call that quite effective teaching extracurricular.
Is that book Xenophon's Anabasis?
That's the one, yeah. And I've got a great professor at Scifi, which I'm very lucky.
For people who haven't read Anabasis, can you give some broad context of what it is, who is Xenophon?
Yes. So Xenophon is, in the Anabasis, is a man who gets stuck in Persia, having gone with a mercenary army to overthrow the king, loses his battle, and finds himself stuck in the middle of a hostile empire and has to sort of march his way out. And it initially took me as it's a great kind of, just a great story of the escape and the hardship and everything. But it's got a lot of interesting stuff that you can learn about Xenophon's political figures, political beliefs, and how they developed over time. Because this was an episode in his youth, but the book is written at the end of his life, so I'm going to be comparing what he's talking about then, but also how his life might have framed the events he describes.
What are his basic, philosophies or ideas?
Scholars argue whether you can call him a philosopher, but I would say he was educated by Socrates with Plato, and he takes basically a really practical approach of philosophy, that it's based on, a good individual is a good makes a good nation. So a series of good individuals is a great collective, and that's expounds practically because he's leading this army of 10,000 men, and it basically takes the role of a sort of mini state where it's administered by a combination of authority when needed, but also an open discussion. It's interesting though, because he's Athenian, so the cradle of democracy, but he takes a lot of inspiration from the Spartans, who are more oligarchic. So I'm going off on a tangent about it, but it's a very interesting contrast that he presents in terms of his philosophy between a democratic and a more oligarchic.
So his teacher Socrates is known for the Socratic method, where you ask and ask and ask someone so that they refine their own thinking process, and eventually, hopefully, that leads them to their answer. If you were in, say, a classroom with Xenophon, with what you know, what kind of questions would you ask him?
Would I ask Xenophon?
Yeah.
I'd ask him if everything he wrote in the Anabasis was the truth, because if he could provide me a good answer to that, it would make my studies a lot easier. But I think I just want to know what kept him going, because he basically marches all the way from the middle of what is now Iraq up to the bottom of the Caspian Sea, and kind of Armenia, sort of. Do I mean Armenia? Baltic. Yeah, to a Baltic state. So a hugely long way. And the motivation that it takes them to haul 10,000 Greeks with you is something inspiring.
And so you, I guess, by doing a thesis on him and his work, I guess, believe that his work and who he was still has relevance with issues of today. What kind of issue is it? Military? Is it our societal management? Is it economic? Like, why should we focus on him?
Yeah, I think he's an interesting author because, I mean, there's there's a lot you can learn about kind of military studies and things, but I mean that's more kind of factual. But I think thematically, Xenophon is an interesting author, and not very well studied. I think that the idea of a sort of practical leadership through collaboration is something you can take something from. But I have to say, I wouldn't call him a kind of one of those fundamental philosophical authors you can base your life on. But I still think there's a bit of philosophical interest there.
Well, it's funny how you would ask him about the truth, because when he talks about the truth, he said, this might be taken very out of context, but he said, no human being will ever know the truth, for even if they happen to say it by chance, they would not know they had done so. That seems to be a theme amongst, philosophers, like, all I know is I don't know. Do you feel like his work also demonstrates that intellectual or practical humility, and it leaves almost more questions than answers, or was he writing this piece of work at the end of his life to summarize truth as he understood it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of the question about it is whether, I mean, the sources, other sources on the same episode are quite scarce, but there's a lot of people who think that Xenophon is writing this when he does, but it's kind of in response to sort of almost exonerate himself, because I mean, aligning with Spartans as he does, being involved with Persians, doesn't make him very popular. He's exiled from Athens, in fact, at one point. So, one way you could look at it is almost a way of him clearing his name. But actually, the way I'm also seeing it is it's a sort of way for him to reflect on what he's done when he's young, and how he treats that as perhaps, a way of Greeks behaving, of cooperating under stress that maybe he doesn't see in his society anymore, and maybe a kind of almost a manifesto of how Greeks ought to cooperate. But though by this point the Greek states are basically in disarray, and Alexander the Great's father Philip is about to just sweep through and tear it all down.
So to understand an author, you obviously need to know the wider context of the social structures at that point. Is that also a part of classics that interests you, where you're learning everything about history and society, the economic conditions, the social rules, norms, values, religion? How do you go about, I guess, taking this holistic research approach to really understand a person? Yeah,
I mean, it is important to, when you're especially looking at Xenophon, because he's a man very much framed by his time. He's he's an Athenian aristocrat. So even though he's living in a democratic state, he may have more oligarchic leanings. That's not necessarily proven, but it's possible. And he's motivated to go on this expedition, which is happening just after Athens has had this disastrous war with Sparta. So he's seeing his own city in decline, and maybe is setting off in pursuit of something broader and something more kind of fulfilling than kind of staying at home and watching his city in decline.
Which leads me to the question, do you agree that ancient philosophers who proposed radical theories had unrealistic expectations about what they might achieve?
That does ring a distant bell.
That was your essay question.
Yeah, no, I remember it well. And what did I talk about? I talked about Seneca and how he wrote a load of treatises for Nero, and they were not quite successful in averting Nero turning into an absolute.
The judges said it's an especially engagingly written and original essay that spoke to the reader with a distinctive voice.
That's very kind of them.
And you got a £100 book token, which I'm sure translated into 1 or 2 classics books for your leisure.
So it did. I think I bought a nice copy of Tacitus, which I've still got. It was great. Yeah, no, and it was it was something to do in the time before your life became applying to Cambridge. It was something to do to feel you weren't going out.
Extracurriculars.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess when you hear back to this essay question again. Part of you obviously would remember a little bit of what you wrote. Part of you probably have forgotten the intricacies or details. I'm sure with more reading and more academic training at Cambridge, you would see a question and dissect and break down a question in a different way. How do you feel about going back to are there core questions or core thoughts that you continually go back to and find that you have evolved your thinking and that almost serves as a marking of your progress?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I could go back and read my writing in the classics and be able to. I mean, I think the initial thoughts I had would, unless they were based on the wrong information, would largely be the same. But I think I'd be able to develop them and be more informed, because when I was writing essays like that, the idea of kind of quite broad and quite rigorous academic research was something new. So it wasn't. It wasn't something I was quite as good at. So I think I'd be able to make a more sophisticated argument and take my head and improve it. But I think that's just a result of being older, writing longer essays and just being exposed to the academic method.
Lots of people find classics fascinating because of the wisdom that you could gain in both what people say and what people don't say. But at the same time, it seems very overwhelming because the society, as we said, someone, for example, is a product of their time, but their time is very different to the time that we personally experience and relate to. How does one even go about learning classics?
Yeah, it is really hard because...
Where do you even start?
Yeah. I mean, Cambridge is quite good because you basically start with... I mean, they've just changed the whole course, but it's just text which cover a pretty broad amount of ground, and you basically build on that while also specialising. But trying to get a hold on classics and classical civilization is very difficult, especially further back you go, because there are basically 2 tracks either end. The first track of believing they're too dissimilar from us to be compared, but also believing they're too similar to us, and thinking that there is more in common with them than we think. I think that is a Mary Beard idea. I think she first proposed that, who is a great classicist, obviously.
And how much of your personal life decisions are, I guess, based on the principles or wisdom that you've learned from stories that you've read in classical texts?
Gosh. Well, I don't think I take a kind of Marcus Aurelius sort of stoic approach to every decision in my life. But I think...
So you haven't watched those YouTube videos like start your day with a Marcus Aurelius mindset?
I think there's things about stoicism that I think you don't have to take the whole way. You don't have to treat everything in life with a completely straight face. I mean, it's quite good Marcus Aurelius especially is quite good in his practical philosophy with sort of not worrying about things that are out of your control. Though as a Roman emperor, there's not much that isn't out of your control. But I think the more interesting thing that classics can bring to you is sort of seeing how the stories and the text influence later things. The most recent example was if you've been following the Ashes, the cricket, which you may or may not have, and how it has this kind of incredible drama to it, of the back and forth, the great kind of wins and losses and the heroes, and it's kind of the most incredibly pretentious thing to say, and I heard it on the radio and I thought it was pretentious, but you can see a sort of Homeric epic sort of narrative in it. So yeah, you can frame your world in that way, but it enhances it, through everything, language, how language evolves, how literature evolves, architecture. I mean, it's all around us, so it's a really useful subject.
And are there groups of people who you regularly discuss or debate, share similar interests as you grew up? Because I would imagine reading is important, but also like just in-person discussions and debates.
Yeah, I mean, I did. The major things for that were the debating in the MUN, which I did at school, as a sort of afternoon activity. And yeah, it's a good place. Debating is good at school to kind of rehearse and kind of practice your skills in making an argument. But I think what you need to do, and what I would tell myself, is debating is not just an opportunity to talk, it is an opportunity to listen as well. And I think it's an opportunity, it's worth challenging. Because I mean, when you're a kid, while your ideas may not be developed, you're going to be holding on to those for dear life and thinking they're absolutely right. So I think maintaining an open mind while you're in these sort of intellectually stimulating environments is also important.
So your school had a weekend of MUN at Haileybury School, which was the largest model UN conference of senior schools in the country.
Yes.
The school sent 31 delegates, and you were one of the few so-called distinguished delegate. What does that mean?
It was an award given to a couple of delegates in my committee. There were loads of committees. Yeah, that was 2019. And it was a great weekend. It was the first time we've been away for a conference, because we'd only done them internally with ourselves before. So it was great to have a huge conference, huge committees staying over at Haileybury School, which was a lovely school, from what I remember it. And I think I represented Oman, which is interesting. And I don't, while I don't do kind of debating in MUN anymore, still that interest got me to join CUUNA and has now brought me into this organising role as well.
What motivated you to do like things like Model UN, which clearly for a lot of people is outside of their comfort zone, and learning about different countries and policies? I understand it must be fascinating, but it's also a big time commitment. Like, did you have a specific goal in mind, even if it's just like university admissions?
Yeah. It was, I mean, I thought it was exciting. I've always been interested in the UN, in international affairs as a whole. And it does, by participating, give you an opportunity to not only read about, but also kind of put to the test certain countries' policies, and also learning about, especially because MUN has got this emphasis on protocol and following the protocol. It gives you a bit of a insight into how the system works. Because it's quite regimented and there's quite a specific way in which you do things.
Lots of kids, when they hear like international organisations like the UN, OECD, World Bank, would think of it as a benevolent institution. Perhaps you also think it is, but I guess I studied international development as part of my education policy degree. And a lot of it is critiquing the kind of Western agendas and the Western influence and how it continues coloniality, how it still endorses a Western scientific hegemony that does not value indigenous knowledge streams, for example. Do you feel like by understanding, as you said, the inner workings of these organisations and how global affairs work, your views on how the world operates, or at least your role in how you can help the world, has evolved much?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good to understand, I mean, because MUN, while you are enacting how the machine works, you don't take as much time to stop and look at the machine. And I think that it's a difficult thing to consider the UN. It's such a broad organisation, and you ultimately have to take in the good things it's done and the bad things. But I'd say that when it comes to international affairs, there is always more you can do, and you're always going to be areas where the world falls short and the international community falls short. But I think to have the mechanisms is better than not to have them, even if they are imperfect.
I think part of what makes organisations like the UN interesting is that they don't necessarily have so-called like waivers, like hard power, like forcing people to do, like EU, for example, would have like law-making capabilities, but like UN or like UNESCO, OECD, they more rely on soft power, which is the ability to like influence and make others want to do, or at least have governing by like numbers and through their research. What are your thoughts on just generally about global influence and the role of international organisations in perhaps standard setting, in influencing policies and influencing politics and advancing world peace as they claim to want to do?
I think that there are pros and cons to soft power and the lack of hard power in the UN. I think it's good because it provides this forum, and a forum which is especially useful for developing countries to interact with each other. And I think that has been the trend, partly due to a kind of lack of interest in the UN by larger Western powers recently, which I think is a shame. But I think, God, I've completely lost my train of thought. Soft power. No, I think that it can be used. It can be exploited. The lack of authority in the UN, its inability to do certain things, can and has been a limitation of the organisation and a criticism of it. But I have to say, this is coming from a classicist, so my opinion, my hot takes are very, very limited.
So in those ancient societies, are there like systems or organisations that serve like a similar function as these modern organisations that have arisen due to globalisation?
What the UN sort of? The scale of the world was quite a bit smaller back then, and obviously because my focus has been Mediterranean, Near East, you couldn't compare even the big ones like the Roman Empire to the UN, mostly because that is a hegemony. The empire existed to benefit Rome. It was not a confederacy of nations in agreement. It was one nation imposed over other nations. You did see there were alliances and leagues, especially in Greece, but these were temporary. They weren't organisations. And actually, even though the whole Greek world mostly united to fight off the Persians in the Persian Wars, immortalised in 300, although not very accurately, these weren't long-lasting organisations. So I think that no, you can really compare these modern systems or things so large and sophisticated as the UN to ancient systems of government.
What do you think propels societies and humanity forward, from where we are now, or from where the societies that you're currently studying to how we've transitioned to now? What are the factors or the drivers that continue to move society forward, in your opinion?
That is a huge question. The unfortunate answer and the kind of the cynical answer is it's money. That's certainly what I would say propelled the
greed, or money in particular.
Greed, and then money from greed. That's what got the Roman Empire to where it was, not through an ideological desire. And I think that it is a trend that you can see in the Western world as far as my studies go. I'd like to think though that these days, even though I would say greed still exists in the world, there is still a desire in some areas, in many areas I hope, to benefit humanity for the good of humankind, and a kind of a perspective and a desire to shape the world for the benefit of everyone, and not just for the benefit of one country or for the benefit of oneself. Which
reminds me of what Xenophon said: there is a deep and usually frustrated desire in the heart of everyone to act with benevolence rather than selfishness, and one fine instance of generosity can inspire dozens more. What kind of unusual occurrences has fascinated you through history that has had perhaps a disproportionate effect?
Oh, you're really picking my brains now. I'll have to pass. I can't. If one will come to my mind, but my brain's a bit frazzled.
That's all right. I guess back on like the human nature about greed. Do you feel like you're thinking of the wider like the technology where it's advancing so much, but our biological involvement, like we're probably still quite similar to our ancestors from many years ago. And I guess classics is a lot of understanding people. Do you feel like, again, I'm trying to ask you these broad questions just to give you a chance to take it in the direction that you want to.
Of course.
But like, do you feel like we as human beings are more similar than different, or as we develop that we have fundamentally had bigger changes?
I think at the end of the day, we are all the same people. We're shaped by our countries, we're shaped by our political views. But I think, and you can see this especially in a place like Cambridge, that people from all over the world can come together and interact together despite being from different countries, different places, completely different perspectives on the world. And I think ultimately it is possible, although difficult, for us to be united and share these same values. It's an idealistic goal and one that isn't necessarily fulfillable in the near future, but I think the principle that we are more similar than we're different is true.
So are people, societies predictable then, if you know enough?
I don't think you can really ever predict where something's going to go. You can look back and see how... I'd say the one thing that appears to me that is undeniable is progress and social progress.
What does that even mean?
I think especially in the last, say, 3 centuries, you've seen civil rights, social freedoms and so on fairly, on a broader trajectory, be moving upwards more or less across the world.
On what scale from backwards?
I would say it definitely depends. I'd say in some parts of the world it seems to have evolved quite quickly. In other parts of the world it's evolved and then hit obstacles. So it's difficult to talk about the world under one term, but you can still see overall that the world is developing, and technology is, I'd say, part of that. But you see, especially in among younger people, regardless of the country, you have a general interest in being more united, being more free, being more open to other people. So I think that's quite a positive trend at any rate.
Are you surprised by the broader trend recently about more secularization, like less influence on of religion and less people perhaps, say going to church every week and that kind of stuff?
I think people turn to different things. And it's interesting there's been a very Christian hegemony in the Western world basically since the collapse of the Roman Empire. But it seems that the way that secularism is in society these days, and generally people aren't going to church, as you say, it's quite interesting to compare how the pagan pantheon in Greece and Rome was treated. These weren't, you wouldn't go to a temple and pray every day. You'd be kind of interacting with these deities almost in a sort of quid pro quo sort of way. You'd be if you were going out on a voyage, you'd ask them for help, you sacrifice something. So it's a more practical and less spiritual approach to religion. And now that we're kind of seems to be moving away from Christian religion, people are, I don't know what people believe in these days. Chance, fortune, karma.
Do you believe in deity?
I'm baptised and confirmed, so broadly I'd say yes. But yeah.
When were you confirmed?
I was confirmed while I was at school. It must have been 2015, 2016.
Okay. So it was a conscious decision that you felt God and you prayed. And
I think I wouldn't call myself a very religious person, but I feel it was something from my family and something important to them and to me. Although I wouldn't say I'm a very religious person. But then again, I don't see the world in an entirely secular sense, because I think completely closing my mind off to that sort of possibility is
So you're currently open to the possibility that a
agnostic.
particular religion could be the capital T, absolute one and only truth.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say I've found that yet.
So I guess with your classical studies and your own kind of personal religious background then, what does like the Bible, for example, mean to you? Like for an evangelical Christian, it's quite literally God-breathed and it's God's word. Do you see it more as just a reference book, or do you also see it as God's words revealed to you? Like how do you interpret the Bible in the context?
I see it in this context of a lot of other religious and historical texts, because there are elements of both of the classical world. I haven't spent much time studying the Bible academically, but I wouldn't say it's something that ought to be taken word for word. I'd say at the end of the day, it is whatever someone feels it is, whatever someone feels the message is. It can be taken, if you like, in an academic sense as a historically religious text. But then again, you could take it as something spiritual and a way to live your life. But I would say there isn't a right or a wrong answer for that.
Would you say that you still broadly live by the core, say, principles of Christianity, like, sacrifice, forgiveness, concepts like grace or sin, or service to other people, say the golden rule, treating others, treating your brothers and sisters as neighbours, are they the core principles that still shape your decision making?
Principles such as tolerance, respect, and the principles you see in the New Testament. I'd say that they are good tenets to follow. I'm not sure if I necessarily follow those as just because that's how I feel people ought to be treated, or as out of following a religious code. So I think that you can, because these principles are not necessarily restricted to Christianity. I think that tolerance is a fundamental principle, and kindness is something that can be universalized regardless of religion, and worth universalizing.
Do you personally, what's your outlook on the future of religion? Because I guess you mentioned how now people turn to different things. Do you see more of that? Or I guess if you were to make a prediction, if we were to listen back in 30, 40 years, what kind of evolvements? Because I feel like people have an innate desire to be spiritual and to learn about the unseen and the almost unknowable. But it's part of who we are to be spiritual and religious.
I think that I don't think religions will necessarily die out. I think they can change and people's attitude to them will change. But I think, I agree with you. I think that an element of spirituality will continue to exist in one shape or another.
So at Cambridge then, you've done a number of different things. Some of them include continuing your pursuits in high school, such as now giving back for the Model United Nations Conference, helping out high school students. Is that because you've had such a good experience and you just thought, hey, it will be a good opportunity to give back?
Yeah, I sort of got into it because I joined CUUNA, and then you could sign up for these various projects they were doing. And it was in the moment it was sort of a kind of case of hey, why not? It turned out to be quite a big commitment ultimately for the first year. This is now my second.
Did you do it with Louisa?
Yeah. I did it with Louisa last year.
Brilliant.
She's great. She was a great boss. It wasn't. As Louisa would tell you, there were some difficult patches and some problems worth dealing with. But no, she was fantastic. And I'm now working with a lawyer called Angela, who's just left Lucy Cav, who's equally brilliant. But it's a great experience because it's an exercise in all sorts of things that are important. Conferencing, management, communications. There's a lot of useful skills that I've been able to learn from it.
You've been described as a passionate and opinionated speaker in CULC, which is the Cambridge University Labour Club.
Who told you that? Was that my words or?
Your words.
Oh yeah, my words. I was about to say I agree. No, I like CULC.
Are you Labour, politically?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Always been.
Always been. Yeah, no, it's a family thing, but it's something that I've very happily taken up and very much agree with.
There's a lot of, I guess, strands of, maybe that's not the right word, but different factions.
You could call them factions, yeah.
In the Labour Club, in Labour Party broadly, if you were to describe your kind of political leanings at this point, where are you more precisely?
Oh, I just want everyone to get on. I would say that I have definitely more left-wing tendencies. I believe in things like a strong social welfare, strong I want the benefits to be felt by the people. I want the state to help people, and I think that's what the state should exist to do. The state shouldn't exist just to be an obstacle to be swerved by the wealthy. The state should exist and work so that everyone in the country can live the life they're supposed to, and I think that will happen with more social welfare, more more control over a private sector, which at many points, I mean, as you've seen with what's been happening with all the water companies, I mean, it can go out of control.
So I guess the implication of being an opinionated speaker is that you've often had to, make your point, which requires some sorts of disagreement even within the Labour Party. So what do you find yourself disagreeing with most people within the Labour Party?
I think the thing that I find the most that I disagree with is the idea that we have to, that there's a need in the party to sacrifice principle for the sake of winning an election. And so
What principles do people think Labour need to sacrifice?
I think that people find it's a misconception ultimately. I feel that you ought to set aside socialist principles or kind of try and appeal to as many political viewpoints as possible, and that's how you win an election. But ultimately, the product of that is you look like you're equivocating. You look like you're not really standing for one thing or another. And I think actually you can be practical in your politics, but you can be principled. And I think it's a unity of both that is the most important thing. Convincing people that what you're doing is right, rather than just trying to broaden things as much as possible and kind of diluting your policy into nothing.
And in terms of the state of Labour at the moment, quite a few years of Conservative government at the moment, do you think, do you like the chances of Labour in the next general election, and would you consider taking part in campaigns and volunteering and just making sure that society progresses in the way that you want it to?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it has been such a catastrophe what has happened with the government over the last few years that it is hard, and it's continuing to be a catastrophe. It is hard not to see Labour winning. So I think, obviously I'll be supporting them in going into the election, and I'll be campaigning for them where I can with CULC, because everyone there ultimately wants to see Labour in government. So I think that is the project at the moment. But I think that you need to do that with an eye to maintaining your principles, because without principles, your policies would be meaningless.
Is Keir Starmer the right person?
Oh, I can't answer that question either way without having someone shout at me. You can definitely have a better leader, but I think you have to take what you have for the time being. It's as much as I will say.
So you mentioned how supporting Labour is almost like a family tradition. As you mentioned before, we're all products of our unique circumstances and environment. If you were, say, born in a more conservative family, do you think you would far more likely be a staunch advocate of the conservative policies and parties?
I would hate to see myself that way, to be honest. I think that the trend you see with youth, like I mentioned before, is that they are more liberal generally. They are more left leaning, and especially in an environment like Cambridge, the trend among the youth is more left wing. So I think that the outcome would be the same. And I know there are people in the Labour Club who have more conservative leaning parents, and nevertheless have strong left wing views. So I think that you can. I think things like politics do end up to be quite specific. Once you grow up to a certain age, you will form your own politics, and they may differ from your parents.
Do you feel like the Labour core ideologies and principles that you talked about are almost timeless in a Western democratic society, or with evolving economic circumstances that perhaps the conservative, like, would you see yourself as a Labour supporter all throughout your life, or would that have to depend on every election and holistically assessing the current state of the world, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think in terms of socially, Labour is for liberalism and liberal values, and is left wing economically, and those are principles that I would see myself sticking with. You know, social progressivism and equality. I wouldn't see myself becoming socially conservative or particularly believing in economic conservatism, because I mean those principles, however they've been enacted in policy, they don't seem to have worked over the last 17 years. I mean, I'm not an economic analyst, but you can see just by opening a newspaper or just walking outside that this country has suffered because of the government.
Do you see yourself one day entering politics, whether as an elected official or as a think tank policy researcher? Like, do you see yourself playing a role in the future of British politics?
It would be fulfilling the union hack I never was. No offense. I don't know. I think my interest is more international, but and I don't really want to. I don't think Parliament is for me, to be honest. But it's early to say. But I'd say broadly, I'm looking at more international focus than a domestic focus.
Do you think the current system with politics attracts the right people to go?
No.
Why?
I think that it depends on the person, but the way that power is offered in this country has attracted, and you can see it in the government, people who are primarily interested in power and not necessarily interested in upholding principles. I mean,
are we not all interested in power and greed, as you mentioned before?
I think it is a human flaw, but humans are also capable of working for the right things. However, you only have to mention people like Boris Johnson to see how a desire for power and hunger for power corrupts. And it is amazing, because he's been classically educated like me, and I'm surprised how I was able to read people like Nero and not see the trajectory, the result of arrogance and avarice, because it only ever ends one way, hopefully.
So do you believe that long term there is justice, whatever that means, that that judgment day will come?
I like to think that people people who do wrong will get what they deserve, but ultimately, in systems in the systems of power in the world, you do often find people getting away with things or not getting enough. But the most you can hope for is that when people do wrong, they do pay the price for it. But whether they do, it kind of depends. Because when the systems are controlled by the people doing wrong, there's not so much you can do. But I still have confidence in things like the rule of law. I mean, like with the whole Partygate thing, you can see the parliamentary system working to fix and to put a check on a government that's done the wrong thing. So I think that there is hope.
So our generation who grew up in Britain are seems to be far more like politically motivated by like 2016 with Brexit and everything that has ensued, and COVID, and say you mentioned Partygate. How do you think these more public and international affairs and the domestic chaoses that have happened with politicians alter the trajectory or aspirations of youth who want to make a difference?
Well, I think that making a difference, especially for people like me who've been fortunate enough to be well educated and attend a good university, it goes from an option and it goes more to something, to a responsibility. Because, I mean, I've been very lucky in basically every part of my life to go to the school I did and now to be at Cambridge. And people who've gone along the same track of having a privileged upbringing, going to great university, have taken those opportunities and used it for their own ends. But I think the responsibility of I mean, I don't think every Cambridge student should feel compelled to go into politics, but I think to be at least aware of what's happening and not just be apathetic towards it, because by attending Cambridge and by receiving our degrees, we've got there's a lot of power in that, and I think that we ought to use that power for good, and I think that's how we give back to the people who haven't got our opportunities.
Are you sympathetic to some of your peers perhaps in CULC, where at Pints and Policy they will be advocating for very social things, but yet when they come to career feel like they need to, say, go into the private sector first to make a good living before then they can go back to politics and perhaps go to philanthropy? Are you sympathetic to them, or do you feel like they have sold their soul and betrayed their values?
I think I guess it would depend what they were doing, but I think it's the same thing I was talking about with the Controversial Labour Party. You can have your principles and you can have a practical mind, but your practical mind, you can have a practical mind without being devoid of principles. You don't have to take every job, no matter how soul destroying and evil your corporation is. So I think you can you can work for good, and you can.
So you're saying that in every company, it's more about what you do with your role rather than the specific role itself?
I don't know, to be honest. I think everyone can choose their own trajectory, and if it's if it's one that they can square with their own principles, then that's fine. If it's something that a company that is not working for the benefit of the world, if it's
examples.
Oh God, no! I'll just get in trouble. Say it was a company responsible for the extraction of fossil fuels to the detriment of the environment, or something like that. And it may be something that you should consider if you were also holding principles of environmentalism. I think you should check your career aspirations with the things that you believe in, and I wouldn't have them conflict.
One of my previous podcast guests, Jordan, said if you're not like a socialist if you're not socialist at 16, 17, then you have no heart. But if you're still a socialist by 40 or 50, you have no brain. Evaluate.
If you're still a socialist by 40 or 50, you have no brain. I mean, I'd agree. I'd agree. I wouldn't believe that everyone has to be a socialist, because people's political views will change. But I think I don't know. It's a clever quote, but I don't. I mean, I'm not sure how they unpacked it, but I think you can hold the same political principles and still square them, whether you're a liberal or a conservative.
How do you find balance in your personal life? Because you're obviously very well read, very thoughtful, very curious, but our brain also needs a little bit of time away from intellectual stimulation, and seems like rowing is an outlet for you.
Yeah, I mean, if you asked any other Girton rower, does Andrew like rowing, they would probably tell you no.
Really?
Yeah.
Based on the amount of time you spend on it, that doesn't seem to be...
It's a great big paradox. You know...
Have you betrayed your principles by going to do rowing then?
I wouldn't say so. I would say, no, I do enjoy it ultimately, but it's hard. It is hard, especially, in a January morning when you're all there at kind of 6:15 in the morning thinking, especially when you're cycling down from Girton, even earlier thinking, my goodness, what am I doing with my life? But I think that it's equally very rewarding. So it keeps you fit, it keeps you healthy. I mean, I enjoy rowing because it is responsible for getting my fitness up, and still is to this point. And it is ultimately enjoyable sport. And more than that is the culture around it, especially at Girton, is such a supportive one. And I've made, some of my best friends at Cambridge through rowing for Girton. So even if in the moments, in January in the boat, I'm thinking, I don't want to do this, ultimately, I really love it, and I've been able to meet some fantastic people and go to fantastic places because of it.
I'm not a rower, so all my information are quite second-handed, but there seems to be this mystery of surrounding the rowing culture. Yeah. Would you like to maybe debunk some of the myth, or give me more of an insider view of the cult, or the group, or the lads?
I think it depends on the college. I think some rowers from other colleges would say that there is toxicity. I'm lucky because Girton is not at all a toxic rowing club, and it's a very... Is that
what they all say?
Yeah, I think that is the reputation, that it can be in the bigger clubs it can be quite competitive. It can become quite toxic.
What does toxicity in that context mean?
Oh gosh, I mean,
or perceived toxicity. What
yeah,
does it mean?
I think people just being cold to each other, kind of trying to one up each other, fighting for positions in boats and things.
Right.
But Girton has the benefit of being a smaller club, but also the culture isn't. We're not a top performing team necessarily. We're not at the top of the bumps, and we're rowing, because we love the sport. We're not necessarily ready to win. Like when we went to Henley to do the qualifiers, I mean, we were rowing in the same division as the actual Cambridge boat. We weren't necessarily going there expecting to qualify, but we just had a fantastic time because we were rowing at this legendary place on such an amazing day, and spending time with people, who you really like and you really get on with. So, rowing this. Everyone thinks that rowers are mad to get up so early in the morning. That's the main reason that people cite that they don't want to do rowing, and they're right. It is mad, but you just kind of get it. You just sort of do it. You have in the Lent term, I got a cold, and I got very ill. And for some reason, I was so stubbornly persistent, I still went out rowing. And it took my partner just to say, "Andrew, you can't go out tomorrow. You'll die." And then I realised, I've actually got a really bad cold. I have to stay in bed for a few days. So I think you do get sometimes so invested that you need to just take a minute and think, actually, am I healthy? That's more a personal thing. That's a personal desire to perform. And when it comes to that, and when you have to say to the guys, I can't make it tomorrow, I'm really not feeling up to it, they always say, that's totally fine. And they find a substitute for you. So that's the benefit.
You're quite replaceable.
When I have to be.
Have you found your social interactions change after you've joined the rowing group? Like, do other people outside of it see you differently, and are you then bound by some of the stereotypes and myth that...
I think people do see the stereotypes of rowing being a cult, and they do apply that to you. But you can still, it's not like, it doesn't mean you only hang out with rowers and you don't hang out with anyone else. But I think from the outside, it still does seem that rowers are slightly insane.
So is that insanity and madness with getting up and that sense of camaraderie? Sounds almost like religious, where you have to be there.
Well, they do call it a cult.
Do you find that almost like a badge of honour, that for you and your self-esteem, you may not voice it to someone, but you honestly speaking and reflecting on your time at uni and the man that you're becoming, is it like a thing where you just take great pride in, hey, Andrew can do this?
Can row.
Yeah.
More or less. Yeah, I think some of my proudest moments of Cambridge have been rowing, especially with the Maybums, not these ones just gone, but the one before, and when we got our blades. That's now something on my wall forever, and everyone in the crew have not shut up about since. So yes, no, it is a good source of pride, and it's something that I saw it as from the outside as something that is a Cambridge thing. I tried it when I first joined, and I went from there. And the other, actually, that is another misconception, that it's quite exclusive. It's quite a sort of it's sort of posh sport. It's a private schooly sport, because like some of the schools in London, like Westminster and so on, do rowing from a very young age. But actually, the thing that startled me was how open and accessible it was, because it's one of because anyone can do it, and the selection. I mean, it depends on your club. The selection is quite, anyone who wants to participate can participate. Whereas I think for other sports, you've got like college teams for some sports, but if you wanted to play quite a specific sport, you've got the Cambridge team, or you've got kind of nothing. So I think that is a benefit of the college rowing, that it is really open to everyone, and everyone can, start absolutely fresh like I did, and just find something they love.
Did you just fell into it, or was that something you looked forward to?
I knew it was something I was going to do when I first arrived. I didn't realise it was going to become such a big part of my life. But I don't think I regret that.
Are there general characteristics of rowing people?
A capacity to. All the men's side rowers I know. What are the things that unite us? Loving rowing. Which is a bit obvious one. I think being very proud of how many calories you can fit in per meal. Second dinners, very large lunches, things like that. So after we do our training, we'll go to the hall and have a very big lunch each. And I think that's quite good. And a very positive attitude to exercise and to personal improvement. It's very. We've got for our summer training, we'll post the results of our latest bit of training on the group chat, and it's very supportive, and it's and it's a way to keep fit, but do so in an environment full of people who are experienced and can help you, and and make you feel good about yourself and what you're doing.
Speaking of feeling good about yourself, does that help your model making, and what does that involve?
Yes, well, this is something that I did when I was very young. And then during the lockdown, when I found myself with nothing to do, it's I picked up again. It's like you get the model kits like the planes or whatever, and putting those together, painting them. It's grown from something I did to pass the time during lockdown to a bit of an obsession. But it's nice. It's nice. It's kind of a way to relax, but also a way to concentrate by doing something precise and very rewarding. Because I've not been very good at painting or drawing, but that's a way of. It's quite a similar process, working with paints and brushes and whatnot, and creating things you can sit in your desk and be proud of.
I guess both the parallels of model making and rowing is that relentless focus on detail and perseverance. Do you find yourself being quite a person who is persistent, who is quite patient, I guess?
I'd say it varies, but I think that I want to improve in what I'm doing, not necessarily to become the best, but for my own benefit and to feel fulfilled and rewarded. So,
is that fulfillment of the process or the end result of the achievement?
I wouldn't say it's necessary to gain a certain thing. It's just to feel fulfilled and feel you're proud of what you're doing. So like for rowing, I'm not going for I don't want to be in the blues boat. I don't want to be the best, the champion rower in Girton. I want to row to a level that I enjoy and a level that I can enjoy the sport and be proud of what I'm achieving. And yeah, I'd say for the model making hobby, that's the same. I'm not looking to create museum pieces. I'm just looking to create something I'm proud of.
So if you're not looking to be, I guess, the best, are you only judging yourself by where you are today and yesterday? Like, are you quite good at avoiding that external validation and competition then?
I think the way I've always motivated myself, and I remember this ever since my GCSEs, before my GCSEs, when Cambridge is kind of a speck on the horizon but can loom so large when you're at school, is just to focus on the next step and to, keep an eye on the prize, but to see what you're doing now as the building block to what's going to come next. So putting everything into what you're doing now, whether it's your first year at university, focus on your first year, worry about your second year when it comes now, focus on the second year, worry about your third year when it comes, and just move from there. Kind of breaking anything down and seeing it as a series of steps is always a way that I think has helped me motivate myself.
How much do you push yourself outside your comfort zone then to take perhaps a bigger step towards that direction?
I think I suppose it depends on the context, but when when an opportunity arises, like this podcast, as a matter of fact, when I got the message, I thought, and for many of these things, you think, I could say no to this and continue on as before, but an opportunity sometimes it says this is something worth doing.
Why?
It's almost. Not necessarily just for this, but just generally. Sometimes I feel that when I get an opportunity, I feel that if I said no to this, I'd regret it.
Mm.
So I think it's something worth doing, if nothing else, for the experience, because it's not something you want to miss out on.
Any major regrets?
Sometimes I wonder if I could have done MML and learned languages instead of dead ones. I think that everyone has mistakes and things that they regret doing. I think the trajectory of my life, I've got to a place where, 7 years ago I would have dreamed of being. And I think, I'm pleased with where my life is, and I'm pleased with the course I'm taking.
You mentioned Western films in your bio. Would you like to elaborate on what that means and perhaps what films have had a substantial impact on your worldview or your emotional development?
Oh my God, taking lessons on emotional development or worldview from a Clint Eastwood film is just the worst idea. I've just been watching films forever, and Westerns is a genre I've always liked. Have you ever seen the Clint Eastwood films like The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, or any of those? I would very strongly recommend it, just because they are fantastic. They're not ones you should draw life lessons from, but they're certainly entertaining. Because I can't think of a life lesson you draw from.
When do you watch films?
I usually watch them in the evening with my parents when I'm at home, or...
So that's the culture in the family. Enjoy a film together.
Exactly.
Get out the food and drinks. And
it's usually like an after dinner thing. You have your dinner and then you go and put a film on with a cup of tea.
And do you talk to each other during the film and have your own commentary, or is it just
sometimes
be quiet and finish it?
Sometimes we'll try. Sometimes someone will say something amusing. Often other people just kind of fall asleep because it's usually quite late in the day. It just depends. It's just very relaxing and very enjoyable.
And who gets to select the film?
It's usually by common agreement.
Okay.
So everyone likes films with Clint Eastwood in. So if it's something if it's a film I've got for myself, I'll usually watch that during the day while I'm doing something else. Me and my dad especially have very common taste in film and music for that matter. So it's quite easy for us to choose something. If my mum is watching something else with my sister, that's if all four of us in the house, that's what we do. But sometimes if it's something we all like, we'll all watch it together.
And when you're in Cambridge, during the 8-week terms, lots of people find they don't have time to watch Netflix. Do you also don't have time, or do you make film watching a priority?
I'm really bad with series. Like I can't stick with a TV series unless I really like it. Sometimes I'll watch a film in the evening, or I'll watch it with my partner in the evening, and just over the course of a couple of days for a little bit each day, which is a good way. There's the thing with Cambridge. Your free time is kind of ad hoc. You don't always know if you're going to have a great chunk of time. But really, I like to be social. I like to of an evening, if the choice was between going to the pub with my friends and staying in, I would like to go out because that's what I enjoy more. But I think keeping a balance between just having time to yourself and time to completely relax rather than relaxing in a social context.
After you watch a film, do you then go online and search for commentaries and think about it, or you just take it as your own interpretation?
I do have a habit of, especially when I'm watching a film with my dad, I'll pull up the Wikipedia and tell him about the reviews and what the production was like, and
like the behind the scenes, like logistical.
Yeah, we find it kind of.
What's so interesting about it?
It helps you look at the film in
appreciate how it came together,
and it's interesting also to see what the reception was like and what people thought of it at the time and how much it
costed.
And how much people's reception of the film aligns with yours.
Which character do you resonate with?
In any film ever?
Yeah.
Oh wow, I don't know. I think it's hard, especially in Western films. There are archetypes you shouldn't model yourself. I'm trying to think. No one character calls to me specifically.
So if you were an actor, was there a particular archetype that you would like to play?
Oh, I'd like a bit of. If I was an actor, I'd like a bit of everything. I'd like to do a Western. I'd like to do a sci-fi. I'd say if I was a director, the one thing I would do is I'd do a proper adaptation of the Iliad and do it by the book, because it's such a good story and it's one that's made for film. There's so much spectacle in it. I think that would be really interesting. If in another life I was a director.
What do you think about film adaptations of novels in classical texts? Are they accurate? Do they show a different dimension?
No, they can be very bad sometimes. I think of Troy 2004, which is apparently based on the Iliad, and has some pretty shocking moments, such as the death of a character that doesn't actually happen in the book, which surprised me a great deal. I think that there are classics, like there's Jason and the Argonauts, which is a film from the 60s, which it's not. I mean, but the thing is, it's mythology, and there isn't a book of mythology that all the mythology comes out of. It's organic, and even in ancient times, writers like Ovid were reworking and rewriting pre-existing mythology. So, if it's historical and it's inaccurate, yeah, sure. But when it comes to classical mythology and things like that, I think it is up to everyone's interpretation, because that's the way it always has been.
So with mythologies and you talk about interpretations, do you then feel pressure to understand other people's interpretations and to understand the wider context, or can you just watch a film or read a text and be happy with taking away a little bit but knowing that there's more? Or are you someone who no, I need to seriously investigate this and come away with a more comprehensive view?
Well, I think that whenever these days someone is writing or producing something that's classically related, that's a win for the subject. And there's a lot of it's become quite a big subgenre recently of authors kind of reimaginings of mythology and things like that. Loads coming out all the time. There's authors like Natty Haynes and whoever wrote The Song of Achilles, Madeline Miller, which is, and not all of these books are to my taste personally, but ultimately they are helping the subject because they're getting people interested. They are they're taking it from a dusty old academic area which no one's interested in and putting it on the front page, and things that people want to be interested and invested in. So I guess with kids in my generation growing up, it was things like Percy Jackson, though I read those slight. I wouldn't say that's the reason I did classics, because I read them slightly before that was where my mind is going. But anything classical existing in the modern world, any media, is a win for the subject.
What's next for you on the reading or watching list?
I'm reading. I like reading historical fiction, so I'm reading Robert Harris's Acts of Oblivion at the moment, which is a new book, which is about hunting some of the killers of Charles I after the Civil War, which is great because I did that in A-level history, and it's a really interesting part of history. Robert Harris is a brilliant author. He did a great a Roman series about Cicero, and there's a lot to admire just by how authentic and how rich his text is, and they're just so entertaining and a good break for reading in English for a change.
stylistically, are there common features to good stories or good text? Is it like simplistic language? Is it vivid imagery? Like, what do you appreciate most about some of the great works that you've read?
I do appreciate imagery in texts. The one that comes to mind most is a book by an author called Laurie Lee, which is a memoir of his walking, age 18, across Spain, having just left home, kind of taking a ferry there himself, and just the way he describes it, it's so evocative, and it's like you're there. So I think narrative is important, but I really do appreciate good descriptive work, and a great author will be able to do it without you noticing and just completely draw you in.
Would you ever write a fiction story?
See, my mum's an author, and from an early age she said that I should never be an author, and I agree. It's not an easy profession.
What books have Mum published that you could market for the listeners of the podcast?
Oh well, this is great. Her new book.
I'm expecting a commission from her for the episode to cover.
Oh, certainly. Just get in touch with the publishers. No, she's been writing some historical fiction recently, and her latest book is coming out in August. It's about Princess Diana, and it's sort of her origin story, how she got to where she was. So yeah, that's coming out in August if you want to buy that.
So she's made a living just purely off writing?
Well, she's very inspirational person to me. I mean, she's started in West Yorkshire in the middle of nowhere, comprehensive, then finally got to Cambridge and started as a journalist and sort of worked her way up from there. I mean, the writing initially for her was a sort of side, something on the side, but eventually her first book was published, and yes.
What kind of old was she?
She would have been about mid to late 20s, I should think. It was a few years before I was born.
Mm. And how did she meet Dad? Was it through writing?
No, at Cambridge.
At Cambridge?
Yeah, at Robinson May Ball, apparently.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. She was a sketch artist there, and he was playing in a band.
Have they been together ever since?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's quite cool.
Yeah, no, it's very straightforward, isn't it?
So do you, so I guess growing up with with Mum's kind of creativity and intellectual pursuits, do you feel like that has been a big contributor to developing like your love of knowledge, intellectual curiosity, reading, and why is she the inspirational person that you mentioned?
I mean, my mum likes to say that I studied classics in spite of her, but actually I would credit her with an interest. I mean, she's being originally an English student, and my dad as well, been able to introduce me to, important works of literature, theatre, and also, great taste in music and film, given me an education and an interest in all the right things and things which I take with me to this day.
What does Dad do?
My dad works generally in public relations and affairs management, so that can range from legal to paralegal and things like that. It kind of varies what he does, but he says it's interesting. So,
what kind of advice or guidance do they give you and your sister growing up?
Mostly to behave ourselves. To behave ourselves. And to be polite, be humble, be respectful, and I think that combined with the education I received at Christ Hospital is, I'd say that those are principles I generally try to abide by.
Is your sister older or younger?
She's younger by a year and a half.
So is she at uni now?
Yeah, she's at Cambridge as well, also at Girton.
Oh right, you should nominate her for the podcast.
Oh god, I think she'd hate me for that. She would
What's her name?
Isabella. Yeah, no, she's at Girton as well, studying English.
Oh,
so,
wonderful.
Yeah, so I can keep an eye on her.
So following in Mum's footsteps.
Yeah.
How did you fool her into applying for Girton?
Well, actually, it was actually her. She wanted to apply for Girton first, so I just sort of got in there. So really, I followed her, but kind of before.
What's the dynamic like between you two? Is it quite intellectual arguments? Is it
non-intellectual arguments? No, we got on great. I mean, we've been together ever since we were small. We went to the same school, so we were boarding at CH at the same time. Yeah, and we're really close, and it's really great, Yeah, couldn't ask for more.
What are some things that you would struggle to tell her in her face?
See, I don't think. What are we, an hour and a half? Yeah, no, she's not listening at this point. Not to lose her temper so much, to be a bit, a bit calmer with people, and be a bit more patient.
Who's the favourite child?
Oh, there is no favourite child. No, there is no favourite child.
Have you two then? I guess English and classics are more similar than different. So, pretty, would you say, similar values, aspirations, habits, traits, characteristics, or quite different?
I think we're similar, but also quite different. She's very talented academically and has a very creative mind when it comes to study of literary criticism. She has a lot of original thought. I feel that she is more inclined to be an academic than I am, which is, I suppose, what's different. And an interest in a very organic interest in poetry and literature and things like that, which I very much admire in her.
Sounds like your family is A, quite tight-knit, B, quite curious and have that thirst for intellectual stimulation, knowledge and self-development, and you're, I guess, quite appreciative of each other's pursuits. What does family mean to you personally, and what do you see the role of family for you going forward? Like, do you want a similar family where there's a lot of open discussion, literature reviews, film watching? Do you want to be married? Like, how do you, I guess, what kind of life do you want to build in terms of family?
I think that, well, I wouldn't say our family is like kind of very academically rigorous the whole time. It's very much, it's not, I mean, we have these interests, but I would say it's very much kind of a casual approach to these things. But I'd say, it's a great family, and it's a close family. And I think that, I'm not very sure about where my future trajectory is going to go, but I just want to be around people, family or not, who I feel comfortable with, who are, who you can be yourself around, and you can be content to be with.
Would you want to be married?
I don't.
Would you want to have kids?
These are very big questions. No, I think that I'm still at a stage where my life is very much in development. So I don't know what's going to happen next, which is good. I like still having.
So uncertainty doesn't faze you, doesn't worry you.
No, because I think the closer things get, the easier to work, the easier to understand, and the easier to deal with things get. It's it's like I was saying before, breaking things down and looking at your next step is the approach I've always taken.
Wonderful. I guess in the context of giving you a legacy-worthy interview, a piece of recording that captures a snapshot of where you are now, and we can both listen back 20, 30 years time and just go, wow, we thought that. Are there anything else that you wish to keep in the recording, or else I've got some rapid fire questions and 2 to wrap up?
I think I'm at a point in my life where I've come far, I've achieved what I wanted to achieve so far, and hopefully I can look back at this stage saying, yes, Andrew, but there were more things for you to achieve, and you'll do very well, I'm sure. But who knows at this point? It's all up in the air.
Some rapid fire questions then. If you could afford any car, which one would you drive?
I would drive a Jaguar E-Type.
What's the most stupid dare you've ever agreed to?
It happened at a King's rowing swap at Anabasis in Cambridge. And I won't say what it was, but people who were there know what it was.
What movie do you enjoy quoting the most?
The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. I do it a lot. And any Star Wars film, I promise.
What's your favourite board game?
Ooh, my favourite board game. I'd say Ludo, probably.
How do you usually answer the phone?
Sorry?
How do you usually answer the telephone? Like, what do you say?
I say hello. Quite boring like that.
Favourite way to work out, but not rowing, but like any other way to exercise?
It's probably just weights. I'm not a runner. I don't like running.
What's the pickup line that worked?
Can I have a cigarette?
You said that.
No. Oh no, that was what worked on me.
Oh.
Thank you, Zara. Well done.
And where was the first date?
Well, it depends because we met at Revs. So
Wednesday evening.
I can't remember what day it was. So that doesn't really count. I think the first date was at Eagle.
Did you make the first move?
No, I was moved upon, but
Well, that wasn't a move, or was that intended to be a move?
It was a move. It became a move. The move was made by her.
Are you active on social media?
Yeah, too active. People. It got to the point where I was commenting on CamFests so much that people would say, "Oh, you're the guy from CamFest."
So you're a prolific CamFest commenter.
I try to keep it under wraps because it got to a point where
Why?
Because I got recognised. It's like, you're that guy from CamFest. Like,
Yeah, but why do you comment so much?
Oh, because I'm opinionated and I can't keep my mouth shut. Which is sometimes I need to learn to, because sometimes it just doesn't mean it. You know, it's not always valuable.
Do you feel like those posts capture general student attitudes, or are they quite extremes?
CamFest?
Yeah.
It's often what's entertaining, but I think it's nice that there's such a saturation of opinion.
And when you comment, are you hoping to influence the broader student body towards your own ideology?
No, the Andrew Classics ideology is taking over. No, I think, and usually I'm just saying what I think, and people agree with it sometimes.
Do you believe in ghosts?
Oh, definitely. I do believe in ghosts. Saw a ghost plane once, actually.
Okay.
No, really. It's like a real thing in Derbyshire.
The ghosts?
Yeah, I remember it. It was in primary school. It flew over, and I remember it being so low but completely quiet. So you heard the plane just now. It was loud, but that thing went so low, it didn't make a sound. So yeah, I do believe in ghosts, I'd say.
2 or 3 reasons why I should visit Derbyshire.
It's absolutely beautiful, especially in the summer. It's great for walking and it's great for cycling. The towns are few and far between, but they are, they're pretty nice. They're okay.
Do you find yourself correcting other people's grammar?
I mean, it's the kind of thing I did when I was at school, but it's a bit boorish.
2 options
Mm-hmm.
now. Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Money or happiness?
Happiness.
Shower at night or the morning, or at all?
Morning.
Physical strength or mental strength?
Well, mental strength, because physical strength can be acquired. Mental strength is kind of more difficult.
Are you more of a thinker or a doer?
I tend to do than I think.
Are you more street smart or book smart?
Neither smart. Neither smart. I'm a silly boy.
What's your guilty pleasure?
Buying models. I do it too much. Ones that I'll never be able to make. I just have a huge stack at this point. That is my big money drain.
Favourite pun?
Favourite pun? Oh gosh. I've got one and I'm going to kick myself if I don't remember it. No, it's gone, I'm sorry.
Do you believe in second chances?
I think it's all a matter of scale.
What's humanity's worst quality?
Greed.
What's humanity's most redeeming quality?
Mercy.
Second to last question then.
Mm-hmm.
You've read a lot, a lot of different people, a lot of different theories, ideologies, and I understand your views are still developing.
Mm-hmm.
But what have you found to be the best diagnosis of the human condition that we talked about, the common elements, and what do you think most closely align with capital T truth at this point?
Oh, I think people have come close. I think when it comes to a study of humanity and in all of its spectrums and all of its manifestations, I think of A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, which is a very long book, but one with so many different facets of humanity presented, but ends with such an incredible act. I won't spoil it, but it ends with an incredible act of self-sacrifice, and I think it's it shows humanity at its best and its worst, but ultimately at its best.
I guess final question, with the broader context of your life, you know, being born in London, growing up at, you know, Derbyshire and quite an stimulating family with your inspirational mother working towards her own creative pursuits, and your father who does a variety of things and clearly enjoy his work, and having that sounds like a very stable family for them to have stayed together for that long with a religious influence as well, for you to go on the tour at Christ Hospital, you know, being blown away by the ground and thinking like how cool and adventurous it would be to move there, and after you getting there, you know, learning to be more independent, signing up to the different like photography, essay writing competitions, doing very well, being influenced by very passionate and dedicated teachers like Mr. Thompson, having them, you know, give you intellectual simulations, including like, you know, Xenophon's book, and now you're obviously picking it back up to write your own thesis on, and your continual kind of developments, you know, in school, thinking about classics and developing your hobbies, also signing up for like Model UN, being a distinguished delegate, you know, achieving things and getting high praise even from your headmaster, Mr. Reed, or Simon Reed. I don't know if you guys went by first name or second name basis.
It was Mr. Reed generally.
Mr. Reed, not Simon.
No, maybe these days, I suppose, yeah.
Playing music, you know, learning about all the traditions and the nuances of the languages of the school, and having that shared camaraderie of the school culture, developing your interest in like Bronze Age archaeology, doing things in, you know, customer service and retail, and then now coming to uni, watching, you know, continuing your habits of watching films and critiquing and learning, and being far more invested in rowing than you perhaps anticipated that you were. Even though you had got a cold, you still wanted to get up and show your masculinity.
For better or for worse.
But heeding your partner's advice that perhaps it is nice to have a break when you are not well, but also discovering the fatal reality that you are at times replaceable.
I was very glad I was replaceable in that instance.
Deciding to give back through the CUUNA, you know, the United Nations Association, helping out high school, being a passionate and opinionated speaker at CULC, the Labour Club's planting policy, thinking about where there's nations heading after many years of conservative governance, focusing on your like model making, your other creative hobbies. With all of those things in mind, what's one message, quote, or saying you wish every educator, teacher, role model, coach would promote, and every child would internalize your message to the world, or to your kids if you decide to have them in the future?
Is a quote, and I've forgotten the author, but I'll tell you when I remember it, that my mother told me. It's, "You are invulnerable, you have no Achilles heel, you will go on, and when you have prevailed, you can say, where I have come, many a one has failed." And I think that's words to live by, in my opinion.
Very deep.
I think it's Yeats, but I'm not sure. I'll have to let you know.
That's brilliant. Well, Andrew, it's been a pleasure chatting. Nice talking to an old blue. I hope you found this experience worthwhile and enjoyable.
Lovely, David, lovely.
Cool. And I wish you all the best for your job, events job this summer, helping out with weddings and birthday parties.
No, it'd be good fun.
Yeah, it would be awesome. And
good luck at Goldman.
Thank you very much. Hopefully we can have more conversations.
Certainly.
Cheers.
Lovely.